Hi, welcome to the lecture 19 of week 4. We were discussing morphology for last few classes. Even today we will be talking about morphology, and today's topic is morphological processes. So, in the last class we already talked about some processes, or rather we started talking about some processes. In today's lecture we will be initially talking about the problems of defining a word. Then we talk about some morphological processes which are familiar to you, inflection, derivation, and now we will be talking about multiple affixation. You know about affixation already. We will learn about compounding, conversion, and few more strategies of word formation. So, you remember when we started the discussion of morphology, we did talk about the idea of mental lexicon. So, we said that we do store different words inside our head, which we can call the mental lexicon. If we consider the concept of word, you can ask this question: is it a linguistic unit? If yes, how do we define it? So, there is this concept of orthographic word, which is of course related to written language, as you can understand. So, we can describe an orthographic word in the following manner: uninterrupted string of letters preceded by a blank space and followed by a blank space. This is a concept of a written word, right? But there is a problem. So, if two words together can actually create one word, which we also refer to such concepts as compounds. For example, black and board together can create blackboard. So, then how will you define it? Will you say that there are two words, or you will say that there is one word? So, when we define the idea of word, we can see that there are certain problems, and we will see whether morphology can help us. So, now the question is, can we define a word differently? We can say that a word is basically a combination of different sound structures by taking help of phonology. We can talk about the internal integrity of words. We can define a word in terms of meaning, the semantic component. We can also talk about a word in terms of sentence structure, because we are talking about grammatical relations already. So, how will we define word? There are different options available to you. So, I am asking you to think about it at this point, and I am also asking you to think about the following bullet points. Are the words surrounded by potential pauses in speech? So, if we talk about spoken words, can we say that there are pauses and that is how we define words, or there is something else? And I will also ask you to think about the factor of stress patterns. Are there different stress patterns for different words? So, you already learnt about stress from your idea of phonology. So, I am asking you to think about these two in terms of spoken words as well. So, now you can see I have listed a number of points which are related to the basic concept of words. You know from school grammar that words are entities that have part of speech specification. So, when we talk about a word, we also talk about the parts of speech specifications. We can say that words are syntactic atoms. This is very important. Why we are saying that syntactic atoms? Because you know that in syntax we talk about phrases and sentences. So, we will basically talk about the construction of different phrases and sentences and how these are done in different complex manners. So, for now we can talk about words from this different viewpoint, where words are viewed as syntactic atoms. Words usually have one main stress. This is again a phonological notion. I mean, we are borrowing some notions from phonology, suprasegments, to explain a word in terms of the occurrence of stress. And we can ask this question: are words indivisible units? Now, you have an answer to this question, I am sure, because you have understood the definition of morpheme by now from both grammatical function and meaning component. So, you can say that words are created with the help of multiple morphemes. I mean, it is up to you how you want to define word for yourself, but I am just trying to talk about these different points which are useful for us. Grammatically specified forms are called grammatical words. This is another important concept for us. So, some kind of grammatical the notion of grammatically specified forms are there, and we call them grammatical words. This depends on the usage, how we are using them. So, now the question is, how do we study formation of words? And you can understand that in morphology we are talking about the different small units which are actually helpful in creating words, building words. So, we will talk about the study of word formation. So, how do we study word formations? And there are certain concepts which are useful for us. For example, how do we analyze morphologically complex words? So, there can be different kinds of complexity, like we were talking about this concept of a compound, whether it is one word or two different words. This is one kind of complexity. There can be more different types of complexities, but how do we analyze them? So, we take help of morphemes to analyze them. So, morphemes are basically our helpful concepts that can help us to analyze words. And now we know that there are free morphemes and bound morphemes. We know that there are differences, and we should also keep in mind that while talking about free morpheme and bound morpheme, we should keep in mind that there is a difference between lexical and functional morpheme. So, all these will be super helpful for us while talking about word formations. We also learnt about the differences between root, stem and base. Basically, we came across some very important distinctions in the domain of morphology in the previous class. Now, let me talk about this idea of concatenation. So, what we can say that complex words are created by concatenation. What is it? It is basically linking together the bases and affix in a chain. We will see later that not all languages have a similar type of arrangement of morphemes. So, when we will talk about them, we will see that the importance of concatenation is useful for us in the domain of morphology. And there are non-concatenative ways of forming morphologically complex words. So, there are linking of bases and affix in a chain, and there are examples where something else happens. So, we already learnt about some morphological processes. We learnt about inflection and derivation, which are morphological processes, as I told you in the very beginning. We also learnt about different types of affixations. If you remember, we talked about prefix, suffix, infix, etc. And we can talk about multiple affixations now. So, I have given some examples here, you can quickly check them and also tell yourself about the status of these. So, whether the status of the words are changing after the addition of bound morphemes, whether these are like inflectional morphemes or derivational morphemes, all these things you can figure out from this set of data. So, from nation, if we add al, national, do you think that the category is changing? Then there is another example, nationalize. Do you think that the category is changing? Then denationalize, you can also think about the change of categories. Then denationalization, not denationalize it, this is denationalization. Then anti-denationalization and pre-anti-denationalization. So, we are basically adding many morphemes. We started from nation and we saw that from nation to national it is a derivational morpheme because it is changing the grammatical category. then nationalize, it's again changing the grammatical category. So, we have to constantly think about the stages where we are adding more bound morphemes and we are trying to see whether the grammatical categories are changing. In other words, whether these are processes of derivation, not inflection. So, these examples, this is one set of example that I have given, taken from a reading suggested for you. You will also go through the reading soon. So, you can basically have more examples in your mind, and it is very important for you to bring examples from Indian languages as well. So, you think about your own language, the language or languages that you speak. Are there examples of multiple affixations? If yes, what kind of affixations are there? Can you comment on the status of the bound morphemes? Can you comment on the category changes, for example? So, we are coming back to the idea of inflection and derivation again, and we will try to see the following points. Did you figure out the inflectional derivational processes in the previous example, the example that I was sharing with you? So, we know that inflection and derivation, we learnt about them in the previous class as strategies, and also when we talked about different types of morphemes. So, we said that there are inflectional morphemes and derivational morphemes. But let us now consider inflection and derivation as two major morphological processes. And you know the differences already. You know that there is a concept of the change of grammatical category, and we also know that we can add them to a base or stem. When we say stem, we say only in case of inflectional morphology. When we say base, we say in terms of both inflectional and derivational morphemes. I think you remember these. So, apart from inflection and derivation as morphological processes, we will talk about a few more processes in today's class, because that is the target. Let us talk about the notion of compounding now. So, what are compounds? We briefly mentioned about compounds. Compounds words contains two bases that are both words. So, basically two bases are coming together in order to create a new word. So, if you talk about the examples tea and pot and kind hearted, I am also asking you to focus on the grammatical categories, because these can be different, right. You can see from the examples that there are different grammatical categories. So, in case of teapot, both the components are, both the bases are noun, and the word that we are creating, the compound that we are creating is also a noun, right. But when we say kind hearted, so there kind is an adjective, heart is a noun, and the affix is making it and adjective again, right. So, kind hearted person. So, here I am also asking you to keep a note on the fact that there are bare roots or affix forms. So, in case of teapot, these are bare roots, right. We are combining two bare roots together in order to form a compound. In case of the second example, we are also having affixed forms in order to create compounds. Now, if I ask you to get some examples from your own language, you can of course have more examples from English, which are also available in your suggested readings, but you can have examples from your language and how these are different, how the grammatical categories are different, and whether there are different strategies while you are compiling two different bases. So, I will ask you to figure out this. There are different types of compounds that we are not discussing in today's class, we can do it later. And also I will tell you briefly that there is a concept of headedness, which component of these two bases is basically more powerful. That is the idea that we will be discussing later while talking about compounds. And the process of compounding, though it is a morphological process, but it also give us some insights towards syntax. So, when we will discuss compounding in more detail, we will also learn something about syntax. Conversion is another important morphological process. Let us learn about it now. So, we can say that words may be formed without modifying the input words that serves as the base. So, when we are talking about formation of words and without modifying the input words, it means that basically the base is the same, but there is no modification, but there is something which is different. What is it? Let us pay attention to the example. So, we can consider the root word head, which is basically a noun, but we can also argue that it can be a verb as well. So, in example A and B, the head of the village school has arrived and she will head the village school. The grammatical category of head are different. In example A, this is a noun, and example B, this is a verb. So, basically this is the same word which has two different grammatical categories, right. So, we can say that this is a process of conversion. We can convert one word to from of a grammatical category to a different grammatical category. So, let me tell you that conversion is also referred to as zero derivation, and the category change is often termed as a functional shift, because you can understand the function of head in A and function of head in B are different, because they belong to two different grammatical categories, right. Then we have a different morphological process called truncation or clipping. So, we often use them in day to day speech. So, for laboratory we rarely use laboratory, we simply say lab. For demonstration we often use the word demo. So, if you consider the processes, you can see that something is happening, right. Liz from Elizabeth, disco from discotheque, we are basically shortening some part of the word. So, we are either deleting some part of word or shortening it. So, this is a very common morphological process that we observe. This is known as truncation or clipping. Now, let us talk about blending. What is blending? So, basically this is an amalgamation of the parts of different words. So, with smog we can say that it is basically the highlighted parts from these two different words are taken in order to form a completely new word. So, smog is basically created with the help of smoke and fog, and also modem, the word we often use. Many of us do not know that it is basically coming from modulator and demodulator, mo and dem, that is how we create the word modem. So, these are amalgamation of the parts of different words, and this is an example of blending. So, when we talk about blends, some kind of blends which are based on orthography, we call them acronyms. So, we basically take initial letters of certain compounds and create them. So, NATO and UNESCO, basically these are shorter forms of a bigger version. So, these are called acronyms. Let us come to the next point, which is coinage. What is coinage? I think for many of you this is known. So, these are invention of totally new terms, but invention I mean there is some kind of background of this morphological process. So, these are either trade names or commercial product names that are now used as or later used as generic terms. So, you can think about examples like aspirin, Xerox, Vaseline, nylon, zipper, granola. Granola is a more recent example. So, these are basically certain names of commercial products. We have taken them in English and also in our languages for everyday use, and we use them as generic terms, right. There are more examples which are recent. So, Google, Amazon and eBay, you can say, are you googling it? So, you are using it as a verb, you are actually borrowing the word, you do not mean that you are actually typing something on Google, you are basically trying to mean that are you searching something through a search engine. It can be a completely different search engine, but Googling means a generic term for searching, right. So, this is another example of coinage. I will also talk about the concept called eponym, which is part of coinage. So, what is eponyms? New names based on a person or a place. This is very specific. So, we say Fahrenheit, which is taken from the name of Gabriel Fahrenheit. We also say sandwich. So, it is basically an 18th century Earl of Sandwich, who insisted that meat and bread can be eaten together. So, from these we have taken the words. Next, let us talk about the concept of borrowing. It's if you listen to the term borrowing, you can understand what we are trying to say, right. We are talking about taking some words from other languages. You can look at the examples that I have listed. So, all these words are taken from other languages. English have taken these English language they have incorporated the terms in from other languages. So, croissant from French, dope from Dutch, lilac from Persian, piano from Italian, pretzel from German, sofa from Arabic, tattoo from Tahitian, tycoon from Japanese, yogurt from Turkish, and zebra from Bantu. So, we use them a lot, not only in English, but also when we mix English with Indian languages, but we rarely pay attention that these are actually borrowing. A very specific type of borrowing is known as loan translation or calque. What is this? This is basically a direct translation of an element of a word to the borrowing language. So, we basically translate Woken grabber, which is cloud scratcher, from Dutch, or Wolkenkratzer or cloud scraper from German. So, please excuse my pronunciation. Now, let us talk about another word formation process or morphological process, which is back formation. Here typically a word of one type, which is usually a noun, is reduced to form a word of another type, which is usually a verb. So, basically we took the noun television and created the verb televise from it. We took the noun donation and created the verb donate from it. We took the word babysitter, the noun babysitter, and created the verb babysit from it. So, basically we are taking nouns and reducing some part of it in order to create a verb. This process is known as back formation. So, in this example, in this slide you can see that there are some examples which are basically an example of multiple processes which are taking place together. So, if you consider the example snowballed, you can easily understand that this is a compounding snow and ball, and then a conversion, we make it a verb. Waspish, we can say WASP is an acronym, then derivation happened, we have added ISH in order to make it an adjective. So, let me also talk about the idea of hypocorism. So, what is hypocorism? So, we basically make an acronym from young urban professional and then add something. So, YIPY. So, basically we are creating an acronym and then adding IE, which is basically a new name for a process called hypocorism. So, when we talked about multiple processes, you can also figure out that there are a lot of new words can be created with the help of these processes, right, either one process or multiple processes. But now you can ask a question at this point, do we add new words to the dictionary? The answer is yes. So, if you consider different editions of any popular dictionary, either hard copy or online dictionary, you can say that we basically add lot of new words in new editions. Many of these words are created through the processes. In fact, you can look at them, look at two different versions of dictionaries and comment on the status of the words, or rather the comment on the processes involved while creating the words. So, I have one exercise for you here, which is taken from Yule's book, which is which is also in your reading list, in your suggested reading. I have put in the key references. So, I am asking you to comment on the words that have been created, and basically to talk about the status. So, example A is saying, are you still using that old car phone? So, what is the status of car phone? Next example, can you FedEx the books to me today? FedEx, the example of FedEx. Police have reported the increase of carjackings in recent months, the status of carjackings. Welcome everyone, karaoke night at Kathy's Bar and Grill. So, karaoke night. Jeeves, could you tell the maid to be sure to hoover the bedroom carpet? Hoover. And would you prefer a decaf? Decaf. So, you can figure out which words are interesting and different. So, please select them and consider the processes that we have learnt in today's class. Which of these processes are responsible for creation of these words? So, I am asking you to conduct this exercise by yourself. Coming to the concluding part of the class, let us see whatever we have learnt today. Initially, we talked about how we can define a word differently. Then we talked about the analysis of morphologically complex words. We talked about the concept of concatenation. We did talk about different morphological processes like compounding, conversion, blending, and of course, we talked about the processes that we have learned beforehand like inflection and derivation. We also learnt about a few more new processes like clipping, coinage and back formation. I hope, because we have learnt a lot in this class, so I hope you can go through the slides again and revise all the names so that you can remember them. So, I will see you again in the next morphology class. Thank you. These are the key references.